Thank you for joining the Site Index 2017 webinar. This webinar is being recorded in listen-only mode. My name is John Sadler with J.D. Power. I am joined by our esteemed presenters, Kevin Hinton, Chief Excellence Officer of Site, and Rick Garlick, Global Practice Leader, Travel and Hospitality Sector. There will be specific areas in the webinar to provide feedback and ask questions. You can type your questions and responses in the chat box. We will try to address as many questions and responses as possible. For those responses we don't get a chance to answer, we will follow up with you individually. Gentlemen, take it away.
Well, John, thank you, and welcome to all of you who are participating via this WebEx. This is Rick Garlick, and I have Kevin Hinton to my left. And Kevin,
hello, everyone.
Before we get into the data, my experience is that everybody sort of wants to hear the end of the story even before you tell the detail. So if you were to give a headline as far as the message that we'll be sharing in the next hour, what would that headline be?
Sure. Well, I don't want to give all the information away. I want people to stick around. But if you saw the exec summary, you saw that our industry is strong. Incentive travel sector is strong, should be growing. But there's reasons for us to be concerned. So it's whether it's external events such as weather, geopolitical issues, people not understanding the value of incentive travel, or companies not measuring it. There's reasons for us to be concerned or cautious, or perhaps just better advocates for incentive travel. So on the one hand, I'd say industry outlook is strong. We also need to continue to make the case every day for why incentive travel delivers results for companies around the world.
Very good. So we'll not only talk about data, but we'll also talk about the implications of that data. So Kevin, I know you want to give special recognition to some of the people who helped make this study possible.
Sure. As many of you know, projects like this, the scope and breadth and depth of the Site Index wouldn't be possible without a number of supporting partners and sponsors. And just want to recognize and thank the IMEX group that helped us with when we were distributing our survey worldwide. They helped us with reaching out to their customers, their vendors, their exhibitors, their hosted buyers around the world, as well as Associated Luxury Hotels, Alhi, ITA Group, U.S. Motivation, Echo Destination Management Services of Aruba and Curacao, and the World Marketing Group. Thanks to these 5 companies for your financial support for the Site Index 2017, and we look forward to continuing to work with you on this project and others going forward. So on behalf of the Site Foundation Board of Trustees, just want to extend our appreciation to our sponsors.
So thank you so much. So just going through the agenda real quick. First of all, we'll talk about how the study was done, who participated, all of those issues as far as providing an understanding of what's behind the study. And then we've got some particular issues that the study focused on. One of those issues is the budget, business impact, and then looking at the various influences, either positive or negative, on the incentive travel industry. And then we'll finish up with some key takeaway. As we mentioned, we invite you to participate via the chat function, and we have some opportunities for you to be engaged throughout the webinar. So first of all, let's look at methodology. We had 599 responses, and boy, we fought hard for that 600th respondent, but we didn't quite make it before the cutoff. But almost 600 responses from 62 countries. Now, what's noteworthy about that, and we've been fortunate enough to do better each year, that 599 represents about a 50% increase over the previous year relative to the number of respondents. So right. We've been able to really grow the number of people who have participated in this, which makes us feel really good that the data we're getting, while we always believe it's representative of the more people who have a voice to share, the better and more valid we feel about the data every year.
Right.
60% of those folks were buyers of incentive travel services from North America. 25% were buyers from the EMEA. And the survey was offered in English, Mandarin, and Spanish to provide a more inclusive and global perspective. So that's something new that we did this year in order to really, truly make this less of a North American study and more of a global study.
Yeah, for sure. 62 countries really represents the perspectives of what incentive travel looks like across the globe. As you know, SITE has members in 84 countries, so our goal is to get input from, of course, our members, and we'll see in a slide really where the responses came from. But by offering the survey in multiple languages, just helped us to reach a larger audience. And so we were pleased to do that, and look forward to continuing to do that in future year studies. But what we wanted to do here is really make sure that we're identifying on the buyer side that while 60% of the buyers were from North America, 40% were from other regions, including 25% being from Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So really capturing the perspectives and the experiences of our members, be they buyers or suppliers of incentive travel, in really all regions of the world.
Very good. And when you look at the buyer-seller breakdown, and we have a very inclusive number of each, that about 7 out of 10 of the buyers represent third-party suppliers of meeting and incentive services, and then 29% being corporate buyers. On the other side of the sellers, the seller pool is divided 44% destination management companies, and then 31% hoteliers, and then about a quarter of that seller sample are CVBs, DMOs, event technology suppliers, and other industry disciplines. So again, we feel very good about the fact that there's a very diverse set of voices in this data, and yet we look at the buyer-seller perspective as being really interesting as a dynamic that the people who are selling services. Oftentimes we'll see a bit of a disconnect between their perceptions from their counterparts. So
we definitely saw that. We're going to get into some of that and some of the specific questions, but you're right. Sometimes the perspective is a little bit different, so we're going to have some things to talk about there.
Good. Okay. All good. So survey demographics. One of the things that impressed me about the study this year, and was similar last year, is that the people who participate in this study are people who are really, really seasoned in the industry. When you look at the fact that the average number of years that they've been associated with the incentive travel business industry, 18-year average, and average age of about 48 years old on the buyer side, 46% on the seller side. So you can see 60% female, 40% male pretty consistently. But I think that this is really indicative of the knowledge that people bring to their responses and how they react to the questions.
Yeah, we're serving, SITE is serving an experienced industry, people that have been, I guess that tells us that once people find their way to incentive travel, they stick around. It's an exciting line of work. The global aspects is dynamic, ever-changing, which of course this survey really brings that to bear. I would say the other thing that stands out to me is that 50%, well, nearly 45% of the respondents were from non-members. So of course we want to hear from from our members, but we also want to present to the marketplace a survey that really captures whether people are members or not that are active participants in the incentive travel sector. So that 44% at the bottom that were not SITE members, of course we'd love to have them join, but for the purposes of this study, we're happy that we've got a good mix of member and non-members.
Very good. The next slide breaks that buyer population down just a little bit, and I think the key bullet point here is that when we look at corporate users or third-party suppliers, there really aren't a lot of significant differences in terms of participation relative to demographics. So again, we see that the age and experience and even gender composition is pretty consistent. The one thing we see is a bit of a flip, that if you're a third-party supplier, you're more likely to be a SITE member than if you're a corporate user. But other than that, the demographic profile looks pretty similar for the two major buyer groups.
Right, and we're working on that. We're specifically reaching out to the corporate marketplace to try and get more corporate incentive planners involved in membership. And I would just say, just a call out to our young leaders, we certainly want to hear from you. We certainly had input from young leaders, which for SITE is members that are in their first 5 years of incentive travel or 30 years or younger. So while this demographic skew towards the older, more experienced, we certainly value the input of those whom we consider our young leaders. So continue to participate, because we need your input as well.
Very good. So just as a one last profiling slide, one of the questions we ask is, which regions did you use most often for your incentive travel trips? And I think it's interesting, both corporate and third-party suppliers report the highest incidences of increased use in North America for incentive travel destinations. Now, in fairness and disclosure, one of the things that we will say, despite our efforts to try to make this more of a global study, that our sample still slants largely North American. But I think there's something else, and Kevin, I can cite a study that we recently released through J.D. Power, where we asked people the question. We did a destination study of the top 50 travel destinations within the U.S., and one of the questions that we asked was, do you feel safe traveling in North America? 95% felt safe traveling within the U.S., and yet when you compared those responses to the question, do you feel safe traveling outside the U.S., that, as you'd imagine, the numbers were significantly lower. So I think that may be something that could be influencing here, and as we look at some of the influence slides later, the whole perception of how safe do I feel is something that I think really does play, a role in impacting people's comfort with these trips, and probably influences the planning and usage of the services as well.
No question, it does. You can see Western Europe, you can see North America also, remaining strong, in Caribbean, those being three long-standing, strong incentive travel inbound marketplaces. So that continues to be the case. To me, there's not a lot of surprises here, but yes, there's some sentiment, and we called it out in the executive summary, that in some regions of the world there was a preference to quote unquote stay domestic. But with incentive travel, that can only go so far, because the appeal of incentive travel has got to be to come up with something that's going to be a travel experience that I couldn't produce on my own. And so incentive travel has long been a global sector. So different than maybe a leisure audience or even a meeting audience, that incentive travel continues to skew towards international travel, regardless of where you might be situated in the world.
Yeah, and I think if any of our listeners want to comment on this issue, it might be interesting to hear from some of them. So if you want to chat in a response, and John is over here fielding the responses to the questions and thoughts. So let's get into the budget issues here. This first slide in the budget section I thought was really interesting. Travel budgets compared to last year. Now this is perceptual, right? So this isn't necessarily looking at people's actual dollars and cents, but it's the perception that 49% of the buyers of incentive travel services perceive that overall travel budgets have either greatly or slightly increased within the past year, which is similar compared to sellers. I think it's interesting, again, in 2016, fewer sellers think that incentive travel budgets have increased. So there's a bit of a disconnect between the people who are actually buying the services and people who are selling the services.
Right.
And, to me, I think that's interesting because, again, incentive travel budgets, and if I'm a buyer, I'm close to it, right? I think there's probably more accuracy from one perspective, that I know whether my budget has increased or not, and yet fewer sellers report a belief that those budgets have increased.
Sure. We're going to see how budget kind of spreads across. So if you're a supplier to the incentive travel market, you're providing services that are a portion of that budget, right? And so maybe for you and your company, depending on what you're providing, you haven't seen an increase. But when the buyer looks at their overall spend, per delegate, per incentive travel qualifier, they're saying that they're spending more versus last year. So generally that's good, even if it doesn't spread out evenly across all supplier disciplines.
Yeah, I think if I'm in a seller's perspective, that I probably feel pretty good about that after seeing this slide, that maybe there's a little bit more money out there than I might have thought, even though, as you've said, the allocation of that money might be, again, in some different ways. Yeah,
I mean, this is great news. This overall is, this is part of the headline. This is great news.
Good. And that's part of what you were saying up front about how the industry is still strong and still growing. So median spend, and we always look at the median rather than the average, and what that is that it's the middle figure, because we know that some people spend a lot of money and some people spend very little money. but the median is a pretty good indicator. So looking at this compared to last year, the median spending per person is around $1,500, and certainly varies based on the services purchased. So when you look at what sellers report as far as the amount of spending for incentive travel programs per person, you can see that really spreads out a bit more. The median spending reported by the buyers is $3,000 compared to $3,400 in 2015. So again, this is sort of interesting to me that they just said that their budgets increased, and yet the median amount of reported spend seems to be a little bit lower. How might you look at that discrepancy?
I think it's based on number of qualifiers. So they don't have, maybe they have a fixed amount per qualifier, but now they have more qualifiers. So the overall budget's increased, even if on a per delegate basis it hasn't gone up. So I mean, we're pretty consistent with where this data came in last year. Looking at this year a $3,000 per delegate spend. If you look at this sector across other group sectors, meetings, conferences, other business events, this continues to be the highest spending sector. So our message to the marketplace is this continues to be a strong area for you if you want to grow your business, and incentive travel is an area for you to grow. So to me, it makes sense given what we're going to look at next, which is really around number of participants expected to qualify.
Great. So let's go to that slide. So incentive travel eligibility. 60% of buyers and sellers plan to greatly or slightly increase the number of people eligible for incentive travel awards in the next 12 months. So that's absolutely consistent with the point that you just made about a greater number of opportunity for participation. There was also a significant increase in the number of corporate users saying they plan to increase eligibility compared to 2015, and that's 60% versus 47%. So statistically, that's a pretty good jump.
Yeah. Yeah, I think to us that's more good news. I would interpret that as companies see incentive travel as an important means of engaging people whom they value in their company. Could be their own employees, could be their channel partners, could be their customers. But to me, this is an indicator that the marketplace is saying we believe incentive travel works, and it works for us to accomplish our organizational objectives and goals. So that again is more good news.
So budgets are increasing, and the number of eligible participants are increasing. So that's the very positive message that this data show.
Right.
So let's look at managing costs. So people are increasing those budgets. They're trying to get more people participating, not wanting to cut the quality of the experience. So what are they doing? 41% of the buyers that we spoke to are looking to implement shorter programs to manage the cost of incentive travel. So the idea is you offer a quality experience, but perhaps for a shorter duration of time.
Sure.
That's the most frequent. And less expensive destinations, less expensive amenities, fewer inclusions, and less expensive hotels. But I think that the big message here is that short seems to be the trip, or the goal here. Make these trips a little bit shorter in duration. And
well, we do know that incentive travel planners are working within a fixed budget and are expected to deliver magic, right, for the participants. And so this is really get after when they are needing to either stay within a fixed budget or reduce their budget. How are they doing that? And similar to other business events, meetings, conventions, you're seeing in some cases one night less in order to save costs without affecting the overall experience. So this is similar to what we found last year as well. That there's many ways to manage your budget, but by reducing by one night can obviously have a big impact on the overall cost.
So we obviously don't have any participant data. So I'll put you on the spot a little bit as the expert in the industry and ask you, do you think that people notice that 1 day shorter duration trip?
If it's done well, it shouldn't. And the point should be that for the experience, however long it is, if it's well planned, well designed, and well executed, regardless of the duration of it, the person who qualified for it should have an experience that's going to stay with them. And the focus won't be on, well, geez, it was only for 3 nights. It'll be about the memories that were created during that, the loyalty to their company, the camaraderie they built with their colleagues. So the asterisk, Rick, being that if it was well designed, well planned, and well implemented.
So exercising creativity, innovation, all those sorts of things can provide a win-win. They can save money and yet not necessarily lose any impact.
And people are busy. I mean, I know, I can speak to that myself, and a lot of our incentive travel participants are, they have lives outside their work, and even if they're able to bring a spouse or a guest along, considerations for family, whether it's caretaking for parents or for children. So sometimes it might be, they might view it as a very good thing that they're away from home for not as much time.
Yeah.
So I think this could be very much a positive.
Well, and I can say in my experience, my former company, when we would offer those incentive travel trips, one of the problems with taking a trip like that or any other type of trip is you still have work piling up at the office. And so we had people who declined to participate in incentive travel trips because they were afraid that they would come back and have a stack of work that would actually be more painful to catch up on than had they not taken the trip. And so,
well, hate to hear that, but I guess that can be a reality for some people.
Well, but I think it speaks to the whole notion of the value of shorter programs. That all the issues that you spoke to, that you don't have as much time away from the family, the work isn't piling up as much, and yet it's still not only a refreshing but a truly memorable experience.
Absolutely.
All right. So adding value. So this is, again, very consistent with what we were talking about. How do you cut that extra day and yet still add value? So over 3/4 of the people who sell incentive travel services say that they're actively working on greater creativity and innovative design to increase the value of travel programs. So people are out there thinking, how can I do what I'm doing better and more creatively?
Absolutely. This, to me, knowing the incentive travel audience, knowing the site membership as well as I do, this comes as no surprise. This is a group that doesn't know how to say no, that is constantly looking at how can we improve, how can we deliver more value, how can we innovate the event experience. So I think I'd be concerned if this number was a lot lower, but to me this speaks to we want to own the future of this sector. And so we're going to continue to make sure that incentive travel works for our customers. So to me, this is it's part of the DNA of people who do this, but it's also it's required for our sustained survival and growth as a sector.
So I think the big takeaway message here is that if you're not part of that 76% and you're doing business as usual and you're just trying to replicate what you've done in the past, you're actually then falling behind.
I think that would be a correct interpretation of that. So if you feel like you're in that 24%, and maybe as 2016 comes to a close, you kind of take a look at what you can be doing to be adding more innovation, creative event design, or otherwise upping the value of the incentive experience that you're offering to your clients.
So I think that's a good point to engage our audience a bit. So if you're part of that 76% out there, how are you exercising creativity, maximizing event design or innovation to add value? So please send us any responses. And Kevin, do you have some there that we're already getting in?
Yeah, so a couple things. So this was a question that was in the survey, so I have some verbatim responses. I'd love to hear from our audience on the webinar today what you are doing specifically, but there was many of the responses had to do with the experience that they're providing. So without getting into detail, really focusing in on the incentive travel experience and making it more varied, making it unique, memorable. Those are things that we would expect, but again, I think that's where the fun part of the work that we get to do. There was also a response that talked about a new approach that satisfies multiple generations. So it's really important to know whom you're looking to inspire and motivate when you design an incentive program and you select a destination, and particularly now where you have 4 generations in the workplace that may have different preferences around that. So I think that's critically important. Of course, we hear a lot about millennials, but they're not the only generation that's active in the workforce. I'm not a millennial. And so even though I'm part of a smaller demographic, it'd be really important for any company to understand their own population and demographics, and then to plan the programs accordingly. And there was also a comment around collaboration with all the teams across the region. So in other words, how I interpret this is they were really looking to better understand, again, their audience, working with their different offices. They're going to be communicating and marketing this incentive program to their customers and to their channel partners.
So one of the things that we hear a lot about in our work in the travel industry is the focus on personalized experiences, that this really seems to be something that people are desiring more and more, that it feels personally designed for me.
Absolutely.
Now, that's difficult to do with a large group, but for example, I heard one excellent illustration where a teachers organization was doing one of these incentive trips, and they had apples and hall passes as part of the design. And I thought that was really clever, just to put those personalized touches to make this feel like this isn't just a one-size-fits-all experience, but people were thinking of me and my group very specifically in mind when they designed the experience.
Critically important. In 2016, going into 2017, you hear a lot about customization. Incentive travel shouldn't be any different than that.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's move on to the topic of business impact. We asked the question, basically, what are the outcomes that you most want to drive through these incentive travel programs? And not surprisingly, increasing individual productivity, increased profitability being the most important factors. But I think that there are some of these objectives or outcomes that people may not think about as much top of mind, but certainly we know that from some of the work that we've done on the side of our own company, looking at strengthening employee retention, for example. If I experience these memorable experiences with my colleagues, and I've got that emotional bond to my company, we know there's a lot of work that's been done in the whole area of neuroscience as far as making emotional connections. I also think that even though, again, not a lot of people necessarily report this as a primary goal, but also even in terms of employment branding and the whole notion of attracting talent, that if you're creating these incentive experiences that people want to participate in, that's something that if you're opening up eligibility, as we see more companies are doing, that it's something that might make me say, I want to join company A versus company B that doesn't offer this.
Absolutely. And this is the business case for incentive travel. So if you are looking for substantiating why companies need to invest in incentive travel, what they can expect to accomplish if it's done properly, these are the business objectives. We do have a question coming up where we'd like to get into some of the more qualitative or additional qualitative, but these are the most important drivers for why companies need to invest in incentive travel.
So we know the primary objectives are to increase productivity, profitability, all those sorts of things, but then we think about the potential impact that it has on employee engagement, employee retention, employment branding. From our audience, are there any other objectives that you're trying to create or achieve through your incentive travel programs? We'd love to hear from you if you have any interesting thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'd love to have you type in your questions, your responses to this question into the polling box. I want to introduce some of the responses we got from the survey, which are similar to some of the concepts that were on the previous slide, but stronger client and brand loyalty was one of the responses. Sustainability and culture, which is similar but different to loyalty. Improved client retention, sharing of best practices, as well as communicating the company's vision and involving the winners in the strategy. So to me, that means that company has a really smart CEO or business leader that was in charge of that program and said, before we go back to our places of work, we're going to actually do some work on this incentive program. We're going to talk about where I and my role as leader of the company see us going. But what do you guys think we need to be doing? Because you're the people that are delivering the business for us. So that to me is one of those could be missed opportunities. The study, the index results showed that about 4 out of 10 incentive programs have some kind of meeting component. And to me, this could be a fun meeting component that doesn't take away from the incentive experience, but has tremendous value to the organization. And talk about building loyalty with your employees and customers, asking them for their input on where you're going to go in the future, almost makes them responsible for achieving that, right? Or at least attempting to achieve that. So this qualitative, I mean, there's multiple things, but this gets down to, you know, companies that are really being smart when they've got that group of people together, and structuring some time where they can look at the future as opposed to just celebrate accomplishments.
So let's just put a couple caveats on that. We don't want to make that sound too much like work to the participants.
That's true.
And the second is we've got to create a safe environment that if somebody makes a suggestion, that it's not going to end up getting them in trouble.
Well, hopefully the culture is such that you're right, that we get that. So, but yes, it needs to be carefully designed. Certainly doesn't need to be in a meeting room with no natural light, for example. There's lots of ways that quote unquote work could get accomplished.
Right. So just a bit of a caveat. Great idea, but always think these things through.
Yeah.
So let's talk about beliefs on incentive travel. Now this takes us down, I think, a pretty interesting path of slides that we're going to show. The majority of both buyers and sellers, 8 out of 10, believe that incentive travel programs represent a very strong motivator of performance. And again, I think that very few people, obviously, if you're involved in the incentive travel business, very few people don't believe in these programs to some extent or another, or else why are you doing them? Okay, so let's go to the next slide that asks how effective do you think these are. So these are among the buyers, and you can see that, you know, about 98%, you know, believe that these programs are effective.
Right.
So, you know, there's a strong belief in both the value and the effectiveness of these programs. But then let's go on to the next slide. How much do people actually track the return they get on the investment? And what we see is that surprisingly, given the amount of money that is being invested in these programs, ROI tracking is relatively rare.
That's a risk for us. Something that we are continuing to look at how we can help our members and help companies do a better job of measuring, or at least understanding and being able to explain to business leaders why and what did they achieve. As we talked about, a lot of the accomplishments of a well-delivered incentive program is qualitative. But we need to start with the quantitative, which is top line, bottom line improvements, and employee engagement, employee retention. Those things can very much be measured, and they should be. And you can look at the cost of an incentive program as a percentage of the incremental revenue that was achieved during the duration that that program was in place, and pretty quickly calculate a simple but a specific return on investment percentage. So we're advocates for that at our global conference that just ended last week. We finished the event with a session on this, which is, you know, measuring the return on investment of incentive programs. And so I think the industry is awake to this, and we will continue to do what we can at site to help give tools and resources to our members so that you can do this. Sometimes it can be arduous, but it doesn't need to be. And so we want to give you those resources so that, yes, I believe that this is good. We absolutely are convinced that it's effective. Oh, and by the way, here's how we know that that's true.
Yeah. So why don't people do this, Kevin?
People are busy. Sometimes the company doesn't necessarily say that we have to. The client doesn't require it because the client's bought in as well. Hey, we've been doing this program for a long time. So it's I think a number of those reasons that sometimes we're busy and we might move on to the next program before we finalize the return. And if somebody doesn't ask us to give them that analysis, we don't do it.
So to reinforce your point, to me, this represents a vulnerability for incentive travel. So it's doing great right now. People are increasing budgets. People are believing it. I mean, they really believe the religion. but in a case of an economic downturn, when you probably need these programs the most, and you really need people to be motivated and working harder in a more tough economy, this would seem to be the point where someone might look at these and say, well, I understand that you believe they work, but can you show me any numbers that support that? So to me, really, this is something that I would see, if I'm in your position, as a major reason, to undertake an ROI study of the industry.
No question. We're doing that already on smaller scales. We also envision a larger, more long-term study. But back in July, we released some white paper on measurement, giving our members access to tools that they can use. So they have an answer to that question. Even if nobody asks, they should be taking that answer and saying, hey, by the way, here's what we got accomplished.
Correct.
Rather than waiting for it. And it's not as hard as it might appear. So again, our recommendations to our members and to incentive travel professionals is have some kind of measurement, have an answer to that question, even if you aren't being asked specifically to do that.
All right, so let's look at some other influences on incentive travel. So one of the questions that we can certainly ask our audience, just in thinking about this, is what has been your greatest business challenge over the past year? So we know that people are looking at an economy that, well, it seems fairly steady now. We know that there's been a lot of talk about economic growth perhaps not being what was expected. We've got obviously globalization and a lot of other issues that are a challenge for companies.
Sure. Those in the audience would love to hear from you. What has been your greatest business challenge over the year? Again, you can put your answers into the poll box it should be on the right-hand side of your screen. And some of the answers that we received to this question in the study was cost of airlines, which we saw in a couple different ways in the study, but certainly that being something that's a source of challenge. Destination perceptions. So that may be very specific to destinations that have had a difficult year, whether that be related to weather or illness or disease or safety, security, terrorism issues. So in fact, there was a response that they're avoiding certain destinations based on what they perceive to be a threat of terrorism. So that that's definitely something that is on the minds of all of us, whether you're a buyer or you're a supplier. And then a couple other things that were more kind of to the business of supply and demand was, fulfilling short-term incentive travel opportunities due to unavailable hotel rooms. So, in certain markets there hasn't been much growth in terms of the supply, and yet the industry overall demand has been steadily rising. So that has made it difficult to add rooms. Let's say you had 25 additional qualifiers. The hotel may love to have them, but those rooms aren't available on a short-term notice. So good problem to have, but actually puts you in a tough position because you can't fulfill those. And then one that I think gets back to what we were just talking about, that one of the answers was cutbacks due to new executive management. The new management doesn't see the value of incentive programs. And so while I'm not sure exactly who this is, my hope is that this person was able to show their management what they have accomplished for their business through their incentive programs in previous years. And while there might be cutbacks, have that be only a one-year issue and not a longer-term issue for that company, where they can really show that by not doing this program this year, it impacted their business in ways where they had in previous years been able to grow it. So, that is, again, speaks to the importance, again, of ROI.
Yeah, you really got to have data to make that case. So let's look at the next slide, which really shows, we asked the question, which events or conditions have had the most positive impact on your business and incentive travel? And what's interesting is I find that for buyers, the increased importance of sustainability. So if you're interested in driving a sustainable incentive program, that represents a new opportunity. I think it's interesting that you looked at there are small percentages that even see fairly negative things like the threat of terror groups as being something that potentially has a positive impact, because probably they represent safer destinations that, that may be getting some business driven their way. But I think what really is interesting is when you look at the next slide, which events have the most negative impact, that the likelihood that an event in the world or costs or the economy or threat of terror groups or any of those other things have a much greater propensity to be a negative influence than a positive influence. So to me, Kevin, as I look at this data, it again supports the notion of the vulnerability. So again, things are going great, but the positive things in the economy aren't necessarily driving the business as much as there is the potential for something negative to happen that could potentially take the bottom out.
Sure. I think we've already lived through a lot of this. I mean, 2016 was a hard year. Not to mention political election that took place in the United States that obviously was weighing on the minds of people, particularly on the seller side. It's over. So, you know, we've lived through some very difficult circumstances in destinations around the world, and yet our industry is strong as ever. So it's, I think it speaks to the resiliency. That's not to say that we can overcome any challenge, but to me it speaks to, yes, this is the world that we're working in. So adaptability, flexibility, innovation are critical for us to continue to sustain the work that we're doing, you know, in spite of what might be happening in different parts of the world. And so, yes, we need to be aware of this. We need to do more contingent planning. Could mean that when you're negotiating a hotel contract, that you have a specific way out in the case of something happening and you've got a plan B. Those are things you might be doing anyway. If you're not, you're probably considering what else you need to be doing. We did a job analysis earlier this year, identified the critical competencies for our members, and crisis management was new to that list. So this is now part of the suite of competencies and skills that we are expected to be able to deliver for our companies and our clients. And why? Well, because of what's on the slide. This is the world that we're living in.
Yeah. Let's look at government regulation. You know, this is something new that we asked for the first time this year. Looking at the majority of buyers, you know, they say that the Affordable Care Act, the pharma industry compliance laws, and financial transparency regulations have no impact on the RFP scope of service. 31% say that pharma regulations reduce the scope of service. Only 17% think that financial transparency regulations will do so. So basically people are saying these regulations have not impacted them as much as some believe they would.
Right.
However, could we make the argument, this is not at all to get political because we want to avoid that, but if you became, for example, less regulated, would that have potentially a more positive impact? I don't know if this data really would lead to that conclusion one way or the other.
I'm not sure. The one that we've spent the most time looking at this year is the third one, which is financial transparency regulations, because there were significant changes, particularly in the U.S. market, which is a global sector. Business goes, of course, across North America, but a lot of financial services companies do their incentives in countries around the world. So this, to me, is encouraging. That while these new regulations, I mean, they're in place. They were put in place in April. They'll be made effective at the end of next year. So far, they're having limited impact on the incentive program. I think they're having a lot of impact on the company.
Yeah, on your clients.
But as it relates to the incentive program, so far the impact has not been very great.
Right. And we really wouldn't know at this point without asking data. And maybe next year, if we ask this question, we'll have some interesting trend information to look at.
Well, we'll continue to monitor for sure as we go forward.
Okay. So the impact of disintermediation on the buyer side. So the majority of buyers, 57%, think that disintermediation in the travel industry has negatively impacted their company, while only 11% think it had a positive impact. So this to me seems pretty interesting, because sometimes you hear some of the major hotel companies being very interested in disintermediating third parties and, you know, plan as a services. So to me, as I read this, and love to hear your take, the message says, to me, says if you're a hotel company, disintermediate at your own risk.
I think that's good advice. There is so disintermediation is this concept of cutting out the middleman, the third party, whether that third party be an incentive company or DMC. People are definitely doing it, but what I would say is that yes, if you're a organization that thinks you don't need help of a DMC or a third party to organize, plan, and deliver your incentives, I would say, I hope you're really good at what you do, and you've got great relationships on your own because you're going to need them.
And you got a lot of resources.
So, it's not to say you can't do it. And I would say to those third parties that are concerned about this, I guess my only word of caution would be if you're not adding value to the supply chain, then you ought to be real concerned about this, because if you're only adding cost and that isn't adding value to your customer, whether they be the supplier or to the buyer, then you've got some concern about really taking a look at what it is that you're providing, because it really needs to be value driven as opposed to just cost driven.
Okay. So a question that we'll open it up if any of our audience members would like to provide a response. What effect is disintermediation having on your company? Anybody out there notice that? And has it had an impact positively or negatively that you might like to share about?
And while people are typing in the responses, Rick, I'll just share a couple of the verbatim responses we got from the index this year. And I think this hits real close to home with a lot of people that have responded. So ethics is the issue is one of their responses. So somebody there feels burned. Companies think that they can get it cheaper, whereas they don't, and it takes them more time to complete. So this concept of time and money are two sides of the same coin. That in some cases the internet has made information more available, and so destination selection may be easier for clients to do without assistance. But again, I would say that the internet can only get you so far. Experience with a hotel, especially recent experience, is going to be critical. And then just on the positive side, we consider our partner to be a valuable member of our team. So site is well diversified. We represent all disciplines within the supply chain of incentive travel, and what I consistently hear is that companies work together to deliver a successful incentive program, and so I'll end on that positive note, Rick.
I like it. So next slide, let's look at the influence by different industry sectors, and is it any surprise at all that technology would be the sector that seems to have had the most influence in terms of increased impact? 83% of buyers believe that the role played by event technology suppliers has increased. And even though airline costs and fees tend to impact incentive travel, only 24% think that the role of the airlines has actually increased in terms of impacting the industry. So not surprising, technology again.
Yeah, it's impacting everything we do, so why wouldn't it impact how we're doing incentives? Navigating that, it can be really difficult, and because there's just so many options, and there's something new every day, and so I put myself in the seat of an incentive travel buyer, understanding what technology products work best for my needs. I think that's where a lot of the difficulty comes, because they only have so much time to really do their homework on the variety of technology tools at their disposal.
And then we asked a question about consolidation, and I looked at that. I thought this was interesting because it doesn't feel to me like hotels and airlines can consolidate much more.
Right.
But I think it's interesting that the next major area of consolidation is, according to our respondents, predicted to be destination management companies.
Yeah, so we'll see. Event technology suppliers and DMCs, they're according to our research, there may be some consolidation, some mergers and acquisitions in that space. Obviously, we've seen that in the hotel space in major ways in 2016.
Okay, so let's go to the major takeaways, from the studies. Basically, like wrapping it all up. These are the things that we concluded were the major takeaways from the information. So, incentive travel industry, like we said at the very onset, you led off with this headline. And now after showing the data slides, you can see it remains healthy, but there's more attention to efficiency and growing concerns for world events. So it's doing great, but there's some vulnerability. So the industry strengths we see, 8 in 10 buyers and sellers believe that incentive programs are a strong motivator of performance, so that people are still really believing in these programs, which is great. About half the buyers say incentive travel budgets have increased. Majority of buyers are planning to increase the number of eligible participants. More sellers are working on greater creativity and innovative design to increase value, so that's good for people who are buying these services. And the increased importance of sustainability is perceived by more buyers as an event with positive impact on incentive travel programs, and that's increased from last year.
Right.
So those are all really great things for the industry. Now, the weaknesses, as we talked about, there's a reduction in median spending per person. Fewer sellers think that incentive travel budgets have increased. So again, I don't know if that's a weakness or just a difference or a disconnect in perception. And then there's a stronger perception of the negative impact of world events on incentive travel, with growing concern for the threat of terrorism to the tightening of border security. And then finally, one that I think we've driven home pretty extensively in this is too few hard metrics to support the value of incentive programs. So that's still our soft underbelly, I would say, but I think that sums up the data pretty well.
Yeah, there's strong points on both sides of this. I guess my closing words would be to let's stay together. We're stronger together. We certainly have a lot going for us as a global industry, and we have. I don't think anybody's out to get us, but certainly we don't live and work in a vacuum, and so need to be prepared for the challenges that may lie ahead. And that's both from a business standpoint, but also we're taking care of people, and we need to be aware of how we make sure we're best prepared to help provide those incredible experiences and look after the safety and security of our incentive travel participants.
So that concludes our pre-planned comments. And I'm going to look over to John and ask, have we gotten any comments or any feedback from any of our participants?
We have not received any yet. Hopefully we will shortly or in the future.
Okay. Well, we can certainly look at that and say that if you have any additional feedback or would like to send comments in, will that opportunity still be available, John?
Absolutely.
Yeah, just send your email to site@siteglobal.com. We will also make this recorded webinar available on our website at siteglobal.com/siteindex. So if you are able to share that with your friends and colleagues, to let them know that they can view that, listen to this recorded, should be posted by the end of today.
So on behalf of Kevin, myself, and John, we want to thank everyone for listening today, taking some time out of your day. We hope the study's been informative and valuable, and we'll continue to be socializing the results in support of the incentive travel industry.
Thanks very much to John, to you, and to Rick and JD Power for being great partners for us. Site Foundation is really proud to present the Site Index each year to our sponsors, to all those who responded. Thanks very much. We'll continue to use this information to update what's happening in the sector, and you can look forward to this study being published again next year as we look into 2018. But for now, we'll say thanks very much for joining us, and have a great day.